I was rummaging through Grandma Edna's old cedar chest, the one she kept in the attic under a heap of dusty quilts. The attic was hot and musty, filled with the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. I had volunteered to help clean out her things, partly to escape the tension downstairs and partly because I always loved the stories hidden in her treasures. As I lifted a faded quilt, a small envelope slipped out and fluttered to the floor. My heart did a little flip. The envelope was addressed to me in Grandma Edna's elegant handwriting. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of its potential contents pressing down on me. Then, with a deep breath, I tore it open. Inside was a letter, written in her usual neat script. I started reading, and with each line, my world shifted. "Dear Harper," it began, "I have watched you grow into a strong and capable woman, often overshadowed by your brother's achievements. Know that I see you, and I value you for who you are. I have decided to leave you the family heirlooms, the ones you always admired. They are yours, my dear, to cherish and protect." I had to sit down, my legs suddenly weak. Grandma Edna's words were like a balm to my soul, but they also set off a storm of emotions. I knew how much those heirlooms meant to Bryce, how he assumed they would be his, just like everything else. This letter was a game changer, a secret that could tilt the delicate balance of our family dynamics. "Harper." My mother's voice floated up the stairs, jolting me back to reality. "Are you coming down for dinner?" "Yeah, just a minute." I called back, folding the letter and slipping it into my pocket. I needed time to process this, to figure out what it meant for me and for us. Downstairs, the usual scene unfolded. My brother Bryce, the golden child, was regaling our parents with tales of his latest triumph at the bank, his voice dripping with the confidence of someone who knew they were adored. My parents, Lorraine and Gerald, hung on his every word, their faces alight with pride. I slid into my seat at the table, trying to mask the turmoil brewing inside me. "Hey, Harper," Bryce said with that easy grin of his. "How's the event planning going? Any big gigs coming up?" "It's good," I replied, keeping my tone light. "I'm working on a charity gala for next month. Should be a big deal." "That's nice," my mother said, her attention already drifting back to Bryce. "You know, Bryce, you should invite some of your clients. They'd love a good charity event." I clenched my fork a little tighter, forcing a smile. "Yeah, maybe." Dinner continued in the same vein, with Bryce as the star of the show. But the letter burned a hole in my pocket, a constant reminder of the secret I now held. As the conversation flowed around me, I couldn't help but wonder how things would change once the truth came out. After dinner, I excused myself and headed to my room, the letter weighing heavily on my mind. I paced the floor, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me wanted to confront Bryce, to throw the letter in his face and watch his smug confidence crumble. But another part of me hesitated, not wanting to upset the fragile peace in our family. I thought of Grandma Edna, her kind eyes and gentle smile. She had always been my anchor, the one who saw me for who I truly was. Her decision to leave the heirlooms to me felt like a validation I'd been craving for years. But it also came with a responsibility I wasn't sure I was ready to shoulder. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The letter was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite a fire I couldn't yet understand. I didn't know where this path would lead, but I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. And with that thought, I drifted into a restless sleep, the promise of change hanging in the air like a storm on the horizon. The morning after finding Grandma Edna's letter, I woke up with a sense of determination. It was time to confront the favoritism that had been a shadow over my life for too long. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror, noticing the resolve in my eyes. Today was the day I would speak up. Downstairs, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the chatter of my parents. Bryce was already at the table, scrolling through his phone. My parents sat across from him, their attention fully absorbed in whatever story he was spinning today. "Morning," I said, sliding into a chair. "Morning, Harper," my father, Gerald, replied, barely looking up. "Bryce was just telling us about a new client he landed. Sounds impressive." "Yeah, it's a big deal," Bryce said with a smug smile. not missing a beat, could lead to some major opportunities. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. That's great, Bryce. But I've been thinking. My mother, Lorraine, looked up, her expression curious. About what, dear? About how things are around here. How it feels like Bryce's achievements always overshadow mine, no matter what I do. There it was, out in the open. My heart raced as I waited for their reaction. Bryce smirked, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, surprise, maybe. Come on, Harper. You know it's not like that, isn't it? I challenged, my voice steady. I'm working hard too, and I've accomplished a lot in my own right. But it never seems to matter. My father frowned, setting down his coffee mug. Harper, we're proud of you. But Bryce's work is just different. Different? I echoed, frustration bubbling up. Or is it just more important to you because it fits your idea of success? Lorraine sighed, her expression softening slightly. We don't mean to make you feel that way, Harper. It's just. Bryce has always been so driven. And I'm not? I shot back, feeling the sting of their words. I've been working tirelessly too, but it's like you only see him. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then Bryce leaned back, crossing his arms. Look, Harper, maybe you're just taking things too personally. I stared at him, incredulous. Too personally? This isn't just about me, Bryce. It's about fairness, about being seen. My father's jaw tightened. This isn't the time for this discussion. We're all just trying to do our best. Exactly, I said, standing up. And maybe it's time you started seeing my best too. I left the kitchen, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and relief. I had finally said what I needed to, but it didn't change the fact that I felt more isolated than ever. As I walked outside to clear my head, I spotted Grandma Edna's garden, a small oasis of calm and color. Her presence was almost tangible there, like she was whispering encouragement in the rustling leaves. Later that day, I was at work, trying to focus on the details of the upcoming gala. The event was my chance to prove myself, to step out of Bryce's shadow and into my own light. But my mind kept drifting back to the morning's confrontation. As I reviewed the guest list, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Curious, I opened it. Harper, it's Bryce. Can we talk? I think we need to clear the air. I hesitated, the memory of his dismissive tone still fresh. But curiosity got the better of me. Maybe there was more to this than I realized. We met at a nearby cafe, the kind of place Bryce usually avoided for its lack of sophistication. He was already there, looking uncharacteristically tense. Thanks for coming, he said as I sat down. What's this about, Bryce? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around before leaning in. Look, I know things have been tense between us. And I get why you're upset. But there's something you should know. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite myself. What is it? He hesitated, his usual confidence faltering. I'm in a bit of a bind, Harper. Financially. Things aren't as rosy as they seem. I blinked, taken aback by the admission. Bryce, the golden boy, in trouble? It was almost unthinkable. Why are you telling me this? Because I need help, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. And because I know you're the only one who might actually listen. The revelation hung in the air between us, a new twist in our complicated relationship. As I looked at Bryce, I saw not just my brother, but a man struggling with his own demons. It was a moment that changed everything, adding layers to my understanding of him and deepening the conflict I faced. I left the cafe with more questions than answers, the path ahead more uncertain than ever. But one thing was clear, the story was far from over. The days following my conversation with Bryce were a whirlwind of emotions and unexpected revelations. I couldn't shake the feeling that our family was perched on the edge of a precipice, ready to tumble into chaos at any moment. Bryce's confession about his financial troubles had opened a Pandora's box of questions and uncertainties. One afternoon, as I was finalizing details for the charity gala, I found myself distracted by the memory of Bryce's plea for help. His vulnerability had been so raw, so unlike the confident facade he usually wore. But as much as I wanted to help him, a part of me felt vindicated. Bryce, the untouchable, was finally facing the consequences of his actions. Later that week, I was at the family home, ostensibly to discuss some last-minute arrangements for the gala with my mother. Lorraine was in the living room, flipping through a stack of magazines, her mind clearly elsewhere. "Mom, can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She looked up, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "Of course, Harper. What's on your mind?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "It's about Bryce. Have you noticed anything off with him lately?" Her brow furrowed slightly. "Off? What do you mean?" I sighed, deciding to take a leap. "I think he's in some kind of trouble. Financial trouble." She blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Bryce? Are you sure?" "Pretty sure," I replied, watching her reaction closely. "He mentioned something to me the other day. I think he might need help." Lorraine's face softened, but there was a flicker of something else there too, denial, maybe. "Bryce has always been so responsible. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." I wanted to shake her, to make her see the truth. But I held back, knowing it wasn't the time for that battle. "Maybe, but I think we should keep an eye on him, just in case." As I left the room, I couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration. My parents' blind faith in Bryce was like a fortress, impenetrable and unwavering. But the cracks were starting to show, and it was only a matter of time before the walls came down. The next day, I was back at the office, preparing for a meeting with the gala sponsors. My phone buzzed with a message from Bryce, asking if we could meet again. I agreed, curious to see what he had to say. We met at a quiet park, away from prying eyes and ears. Bryce looked more haggard than before, the weight of his troubles clearly taking a toll. "Thanks for coming, Harper," he said, his voice subdued. "What's going on, Bryce?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "You look like you haven't slept in days." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our childhood. "It's bad, Harper. Worse than I let on. I'm in over my head and I don't know how to fix it." I crossed my arms, trying to process his words. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Or Mom and Dad?" "Because I'm supposed to be the one who has it all together," he replied, a bitter edge to his voice. I didn't want to disappoint them or Tessa. I sighed, feeling a mix of sympathy and exasperation. "Bryce, you can't keep hiding this. It's only going to get worse." He nodded, his expression pained. "I know. But what do I do?" In that moment, I realized that despite everything, Bryce was still my brother. And maybe, just maybe, helping him was the right thing to do. "You need to come clean, Bryce. To Tessa, to Mom and Dad. It's the only way to start fixing this." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a vulnerability I had never seen before. "What if they hate me for it?" "They won't," I said softly. "But they need to know the truth." As we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had taken a step toward helping Bryce, but I knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. Later that evening, as I was wrapping up my day, an unexpected email popped into my inbox. It was from the gala's main sponsor, expressing concerns about Bryce's involvement due to rumors of his financial instability. My heart sank. The crisis was escalating faster than I had anticipated, threatening not just Bryce's reputation but my own hard work. I realized then that the stakes were higher than I had imagined. This wasn't just about Bryce's financial woes or my quest for recognition. It was about the very fabric of our family and the choices we made in the face of adversity. As I sat there, staring at the screen, I knew I had to act. The time for passivity was over. It was time to confront the truth, no matter the cost. The charity gala was just days away, and the pressure was mounting. I was in the middle of a final walkthrough at the venue, checking details and making sure everything was on track. The ballroom was a hive of activity, with caterers setting up tables and decorators arranging flowers. But my mind was elsewhere, caught in the tangled web of family drama that seemed to be spiraling out of control. Just as I was reviewing the seating arrangements, my phone buzzed with a call from Tessa. It was unusual for her to reach out directly, and my stomach twisted with apprehension as I answered. "Hey, Tessa," I said, trying to sound casual. "Harper, can we talk?" Her voice was tense, a far cry from her usual bubbly tone. It's about Bryce. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Sure, what's going on? Something's not right, she said, her words rushing out. He's been acting strange, and I found some overdue notices in his office. I'm worried. I hesitated, torn between loyalty to my brother and the urge to protect Tessa from the fallout. Tessa, I think you should talk to Bryce. He needs to be honest with you about what's happening. There was a pause, and I could almost hear her processing my words. So there is something going on? I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Yes, but it's not my place to say. He needs to tell you himself. Thank you, Harper, she said softly, her voice tinged with gratitude and fear. After the call, I felt a knot of tension settle in my chest. The truth was closing in, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. As I headed back to my office, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath us was shifting. Later that evening, I was at home, trying to unwind with a glass of wine when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Bryce standing there, looking more disheveled than ever. Can I come in? He asked, his voice weary. I stepped aside, letting him in. What's going on, Bryce? He sank onto the couch, running a hand through his hair. I talked to Tessa, told her everything. I sat down across from him, watching his face for clues. How did she take it? He let out a shaky breath. Not great. She's hurt and angry, and I don't blame her. But she said she needs time to think. I nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. At least you were honest with her. That's a start. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of desperation and gratitude. Thanks for pushing me to do it, Harper. I don't know what's going to happen, but at least I'm not hiding anymore. As we sat there, a sense of uneasy calm settled over us. The truth was out, but the consequences were still unfolding. I couldn't help but wonder how this would affect the gala and my own standing with the sponsors. The next day, as I was preparing for a meeting with the gala committee, I received an unexpected email from Lorraine. It was short and to the point, asking me to come by the house for a family meeting. My heart sank, knowing this was likely about Bryce's situation and the impact it was having on all of us. That evening, I arrived at the family home to find my parents waiting in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, charged with unspoken words and simmering emotions. Harper, we need to talk, my father said, gesturing for me to sit. I took a seat, bracing myself for what was to come. Is this about Bryce? Lorraine nodded, her expression conflicted. We're worried about him. And we're worried about you too, with the gala and everything. I met their gaze, feeling a surge of determination. I know things are complicated right now, but I'm handling it. The gala is going to be a success, and Bryce will find his way through this. Gerald sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. We just want to make sure everyone is okay. I nodded, understanding their concern, but also feeling a newfound resolve. We will be. But we need to face the truth and support each other, even if it's hard. As the conversation continued, I realized that this was a turning point for all of us. The crisis had forced us to confront our flaws and fears, but it had also opened the door to healing and growth. As I left the house that night, I felt a sense of clarity. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face whatever came next. The themes of revenge and protection had evolved into something deeper, an understanding that true strength came from facing the truth and standing by those you love, even when the path was fraught with challenges. The day of the charity gala dawned with a sense of anticipation and dread. The venue was buzzing with last-minute preparations, and I was in the thick of it, directing staff and making sure everything was perfect. This event was my chance to prove myself, to step out of Bryce's shadow once and for all. But the weight of family drama loomed large, threatening to overshadow my hard work. As guests began to arrive, I moved through the crowd, greeting attendees and ensuring everything was running smoothly. The gala was a dazzling affair, with elegantly dressed patrons mingling under the soft glow of chandeliers. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, I felt a simmering tension, as if everything could unravel at a moment's notice. In the midst of the festivities, I spotted Bryce and Tessa entering the ballroom. Bryce looked polished, but there was a tightness around his eyes, a sign of the strain he was under. Tessa, on the other hand, wore a mask of composure, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Harper," Bryce called, making his way over with Tessa in tow. "Hey, you too," I replied, trying to sound upbeat. "Glad you could make it." Tessa nodded, her expression unreadable. "It's a beautiful event, Harper. You've done an amazing job." "Thanks," I said, feeling a flicker of pride despite the tension. "I'm glad you think so." Bryce glanced around, his gaze lingering on the crowd. "This is quite the turnout." "Yeah, it is," I agreed, sensing there was more he wanted to say. Before he could continue, Lorraine and Gerald joined us, their presence adding another layer of complexity to the gathering. My parents exchanged pleasantries with Bryce and Tessa, but there was an undercurrent of unease in their interactions. As the evening progressed, I found myself moving from one task to another, my mind racing with thoughts of the impending reading of Grandma Edna's will. It was a pivotal moment that could change everything, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. Later, as I was checking on the catering staff, I overheard a snippet of conversation that stopped me in my tracks. Two guests were discussing Bryce, their voices low but clear enough to catch the gist. "Heard he's in deep financial trouble," one of them said. "Apparently, it's affecting his work." "Really?" the other replied, sounding intrigued. "I thought he was doing well." "Not according to the latest rumors. It's all starting to come out now." My heart sank, the weight of their words pressing down on me. Bryce's struggles were becoming public knowledge, and the fallout was spreading. I knew this would only complicate things further, adding another layer of pressure to an already volatile situation. As the night wore on, I felt the strain of keeping everything together. The gala was a success on the surface, but beneath it all, I was teetering on the edge of a breaking point. The truth was closing in, and I knew I couldn't keep running from it. Finally, as the last of the guests departed and the venue began to empty, I found myself alone with Bryce. The room was quiet, the echoes of the evening still lingering in the air. "Harper," Bryce said, his voice breaking the silence. "I need to know. What are you going to do about the will?" I looked at him, seeing the desperation in his eyes. "I don't know, Bryce. I haven't decided yet." He nodded, his expression a mix of hope and fear. I don't want to lose everything." I sighed, feeling the weight of his words. "I know. But this isn't just about you, Bryce. It's about all of us." As we stood there, the enormity of the situation hit me. The will, the family dynamics, Bryce's financial troubles, it was all coming to a head, and I had to make a choice. The path forward was unclear, but I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. In that moment, I realized that my perception of justice and revenge was shifting. It wasn't just about settling scores or proving myself. It was about finding a way to navigate the complexities of family and responsibility, to make choices that aligned with my values and the legacy Grandma Edna had left for me. As I left the venue, the cool night air hit my face, a reminder of the challenges ahead. The road was uncertain, but I was ready to face it, to find a way through the tangled mess of our lives and emerge stronger on the other side. The day of Grandma Edna's will reading arrived with a sense of ominous finality. The family gathered in the old parlor, a room filled with memories and the scent of aged furniture. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the floor, but the atmosphere was anything but serene. I sat next to Bryce, who looked as though he hadn't slept in days. His usual confidence was replaced by a palpable anxiety, his leg bouncing nervously as we waited for the lawyer to begin. Lorraine and Gerald sat across from us, their expressions a mix of anticipation and unease. This was the moment we had all been dreading, the moment that could redefine everything. The lawyer, a stern-looking man in a crisp suit, cleared his throat and began to read. The room was silent except for the rustle of paper and the occasional creak of the old house settling around us. As he read through Grandma Edna's wishes, I felt the tension in the room coil tighter with each word. Finally, he reached the part about the family heirlooms. My heart pounded as he announced that they were to be left to me, not Bryce. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with shock and disbelief. Bryce turned to me, his face a mask of betrayal. "Harper, how could you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible but laced with accusation. I shook my head, my own emotions a tumultuous mix of guilt and vindication. "I didn't know, Bryce. I swear." Lorraine's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Why would she do this, Harper? You must have known." "I didn't," I insisted, feeling the weight of their accusations like a physical blow. "I only found out after she passed." "I would never." Gerald's voice cut through my protest. "This isn't right. Bryce has always been the one to carry on the family legacy." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, each one louder and more desperate than the last. I felt myself sinking into the chaos, the accusations swirling around me like a storm. It was as if the foundation of our family was crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. In the midst of the turmoil, Bryce stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "I can't believe this," he said, his voice breaking. "You were supposed to be on my side, Harper." I rose to my feet, my own anger flaring. "I've always been on your side, Bryce. But this isn't about sides. It's about what Grandma wanted." He shook his head, his expression one of deep hurt. "I can't do this," he said, turning and leaving the room abruptly. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. I felt hollow, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. My family was fractured, and I didn't know how to fix it. Later, as I sat alone in the garden, the enormity of the day settled over me. The heirlooms, the legacy, the broken bonds, it was all too much. I felt as though I was standing at the edge of a precipice, the ground crumbling beneath my feet. The sound of footsteps on the gravel path drew my attention. It was Lorraine, her expression softer now, but still tinged with sadness. "Harper," she began, sitting beside me on the stone bench. "I know this isn't easy for you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Your grandmother loved you very much," she continued, her voice gentle. "She saw something in you that maybe we've overlooked." I looked at her, surprised by her words. "I don't know what to do, Mom. I didn't ask for any of this." She sighed, her gaze distant. "None of us did. But maybe it's time we start seeing each other for who we really are, not who we expect each other to be." Her words hung in the air, a fragile bridge over the chasm that had opened between us. It was a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in a warm glow, I realized that the path forward wouldn't be easy. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild, to find a new kind of balance in the chaos. The themes of revenge and justice had shifted once again, morphing into something deeper, an understanding that true strength came from facing the truth, even when it was painful. As I sat there, I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but I was ready to face them, one step at a time. The air was thick with tension as I approached the family home, the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on me. After the will reading, things had spiraled out of control, and Bryce's financial troubles had become the talk of the town. It was time to face the storm head-on. I found Bryce in the living room, pacing like a caged animal. His usually immaculate suit was rumpled, and his eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. He stopped when he saw me, a flicker of defiance in his gaze. "Harper," he said, his voice a mix of accusation and desperation. "I thought you were supposed to have my back." "I do, Bryce," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "But you need to face the truth." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Truth? What truth?" "That I'm a failure." I took a step closer, meeting his gaze. "No, that you're human. That you've made mistakes, but you can still fix them." He looked away, his jaw clenched. "It's not that simple." "Maybe not," I conceded, feeling the weight of his struggle. "But running from it won't help." Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Tessa appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of hurt and determination. "Bryce," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to talk." He stiffened, glancing between us. "Tessa, No," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I've listened long enough. It's time you listen." I moved to leave, giving them space, but Bryce caught my arm. "Stay, Harper. Please." I nodded, staying rooted as Tessa stepped forward. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her resolve was clear. "Bryce, I love you, but I can't do this alone," she said, her voice steady. "You need to be honest. With me, with yourself." He hesitated, the weight of her words hanging in the air. "I'm scared, Tessa." She softened, reaching out to him. "I know, but we can face this together." I watched as Bryce's defenses crumbled, his vulnerability laid bare. It was a moment of raw honesty, a turning point in the tangled web of our lives. As they talked, I felt a shift within myself. The themes of revenge and justice that had driven me were evolving into something deeper, a desire for healing and understanding. When their conversation ended, Bryce turned to me, his expression a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Harper, I'm sorry. For everything." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace. "We'll figure it out. Together." But just as it seemed the storm was passing, the door swung open and Lorraine and Gerald entered, their faces etched with worry. "What's going on?" Gerald demanded, his gaze shifting between us. Bryce took a deep breath, stepping forward. "I'm in trouble, Dad. Financial trouble." Lorraine's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "Bryce, why didn't you tell us?" "Because I didn't want to disappoint you," he admitted, his voice breaking. Gerald's expression softened, a mix of anger and love. "We're your family, Bryce. We're here to help." As the truth settled over us, I felt the tension in the room begin to dissipate. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. The unexpected twist came when Lorraine turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Harper, I'm sorry. We've been so focused on Bryce that we've overlooked you." Her words were a balm to my soul, a validation I hadn't realized I needed. "Thank you, Mom." In that moment, I understood that the core themes of our story, revenge, justice, and family, were intertwined in ways I hadn't fully grasped. The path to healing was fraught with challenges, but it was a journey worth taking. As the sun set outside, casting the room in a warm glow, I felt a sense of hope. The confrontation had brought us face to face with our truths, and while the road ahead was uncertain, we were ready to walk it together. The climax had tested us all, but it had also revealed the strength of our bonds. And as I looked around at my family, I knew that we would find a way forward, one step at a time. In the days following the confrontation, a quiet transformation began to unfold within our family. It was as if the storm had cleared, leaving behind a landscape ripe for rebuilding. Bryce had taken the first steps toward redemption, opening up to Tessa and beginning to untangle the financial mess he'd found himself in. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. I watched from the sidelines, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't expected. My own journey had been tumultuous, filled with moments of doubt and anger, but I had emerged stronger, more certain of who I was and what I wanted. One afternoon, I found myself back in Grandma Edna's garden, a place that had always been a refuge. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and the sun cast a warm glow over the neatly tended rows. As I knelt to pull a few weeds, my fingers brushed against something hard and unexpected. Curious, I dug a little deeper and unearthed a small, weathered box. Inside, I found a letter addressed to me in Grandma Edna's familiar handwriting. My heart skipped a beat as I unfolded the paper, her words a balm to my soul. "Dear Harper," it began, "I've watched you grow with pride and love. You have a strength and resilience that will guide you through life's challenges. Remember, true validation comes from within, not from the approval of others. Live authentically, my dear, and know that you are cherished." I sat back on my heels, letting her words wash over me. It was as if she had known I would need this reminder, this encouragement to embrace my own path. Her belief in me was a gift, one that I would carry with me always. As I tucked the letter back into the box, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up to see Lorraine, her expression soft and open. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Of course not," I replied, gesturing for her to sit beside me. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the garden a peaceful cocoon around us. Finally, Lorraine spoke, her words thoughtful and sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Harper. about seeing each other for who we really are. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. It's not always easy, but it's important. She sighed, a small smile playing on her lips. I'm proud of you, for everything you've accomplished and for standing up for yourself. Her admission warmed me, a balm to the lingering wounds of the past. Thank you, Mom. That means a lot. As we sat there, I realized that our family's journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt and struggle, but we were learning to navigate them together with honesty and understanding. The resolution to our story wasn't perfect, but it was real. Bryce was finding his way, Tessa by his side, and our family was slowly mending the fractures that had once seemed insurmountable. As I rose to leave the garden, a thought struck me, a lingering question that added a layer of complexity to our newfound peace. What if Grandma Edna had left the heirlooms to me not just as a gift, but as a challenge? A challenge to step into my own power, to embrace the legacy she had entrusted to me. It was a question that would linger, a reminder that growth and understanding were ongoing journeys. But as I walked back toward the house, I felt ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I was enough, just as I was. The themes of revenge and justice had evolved into something richer, a tapestry of forgiveness, resilience, and love. And as I stepped into the warmth of the house, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready to meet it head-on. Surrounded by the strength of family and the enduring legacy of those who had come before. The phone rang just as I was about to lock up the clinic for the night. It was one of those moments that you just know is going to change everything. I hesitated, staring at the caller ID that read Mom. My stomach churned. We hadn't spoken in months, and even then, it was more of a terse exchange than a conversation. Harper, came her crisp voice, cutting through the silence of the clinic. Your father is in the hospital. It's serious. I felt my heart drop. My name is Harper Calloway, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been a complicated dance between duty and defiance. Especially when it comes to my mother, Evelyn. Is he okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He's stable for now, but you should come. He needs you, she replied, her words laced with an unspoken expectation. There it was. Not a request, but a demand. Memories of past betrayals flooded back, like when I was 19 and pregnant, and Evelyn decided that my future was more important than my choice. Her version of love always came with strings attached, and I was tired of being her marionette. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the tide of emotions. I'll be there, I said, knowing I had to see my father, Thomas, the silent bystander in Evelyn's schemes. Hanging up, I leaned against the counter, the sterile smell of disinfectant doing little to calm my racing mind. My father, with his quiet presence, had always been my ally, even if he rarely stood up to Evelyn. The thought of him ill and vulnerable tugged at my heart more than I wanted to admit. As I drove home, the streetlights blurred into streaks of gold against the darkening sky. I thought about the last time I was at my parents' house, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Evelyn's obsession with appearances had always been at odds with my desire for authenticity. She wanted a perfect daughter to match her perfect life, but I had other plans. Marcus, my husband, was waiting for me when I got home. His warm smile and steady gaze were a balm to my frayed nerves. Hey, what's going on? He asked, noticing the worry etched on my face. I sighed, dropping my keys on the table. It's Dad. He's in the hospital. Mom wants me to come. He nodded, pulling me into a comforting embrace. Do you want me to come with you? I shook my head. No, I need to do this alone. But thank you. Marcus understood. He always did. He knew the tangled web of my family dynamics and the emotional toll it took on me. Call me if you need anything, okay? I nodded, grateful for his support. As I packed a bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that this visit would be different. There was a tension in the air, a sense of impending confrontation that both scared and invigorated me. The drive to my parents' house felt like a journey into the past. Every mile brought back memories of Evelyn's controlling nature and the pressure to conform to her high standards. But it also reminded me of my father, his quiet support, even when he didn't have the courage to stand up to her. Arriving at the hospital, I was greeted by the sterile scent of antiseptic and the low hum of machinery. My heart pounded as I made my way to my father's room, bracing myself for what I might find. Evelyn was there, her posture rigid, her expression carefully composed. "Harper," she said, her voice a mix of relief and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "How is he?" I asked, bypassing any pleasantries. "He's resting," she replied, her gaze flicking to the door behind her. "You should see him." I nodded, stepping past her into the dimly lit room. My father lay there, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. Seeing him like this, my heart ached with a mix of love and regret. As I sat by his bedside, I felt a surge of determination. This time, I wouldn't let Evelyn manipulate me. I would be here for my father, but on my terms. Whatever game she was playing, I was ready to face it. Just as I was about to leave the room, Evelyn spoke, her voice low and controlled. "Harper, we need to talk about the future. Your father's condition changes everything." Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a threat. I met her gaze, feeling the weight of her expectations clash with my resolve. This was just the beginning, and I knew that whatever happened next would set the course for everything that followed. Walking up the path to my childhood home, I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. The house stood pristine, the garden meticulously manicured. Marcus would appreciate the symmetry, I thought with a faint smile. But to me, it was a facade, a picture-perfect exterior that masked the emotional chaos inside. As I stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers and polished wood. Everything was in its place, just as Evelyn liked it. "Harper," she called from the living room, her voice carrying that authoritative edge. I found her arranging a vase of roses, each bloom strategically placed. "You made it," she said, glancing up briefly before returning to her task. Her tone was casual, as if we were discussing the weather, not my father's health. "How's Dad?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "He's resting," she replied, not looking up. "The doctors are hopeful, but he needs peace and stability." I nodded, though I knew what she really meant. Peace and stability were her code for control. I watched her for a moment, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided eye contact. It was as if she was playing a role, the concerned wife, the doting mother, all while orchestrating the scene. "Evelyn," I started, choosing my words carefully, "I want to be here for Dad, but I need to know what's really going on." She paused, finally meeting my gaze. "Everything is under control," she said, her voice smooth. "We just need to keep up appearances, for his sake." For his sake. The words echoed in my mind, a familiar refrain. I felt a flicker of anger, but I swallowed it down. "I'm not here for appearances," I said quietly. Her eyes narrowed slightly, a crack in her polished veneer. "Harper, we all have roles to play. You know how important this is for our family." I bit back a retort, knowing it would only escalate things. Instead, I nodded, though my resolve hardened. This time, I would not be swept into her games. The rest of the day passed in a blur of polite conversations and stilted silences. I checked on my father, who was asleep, his breathing steady but shallow. Seeing him like this, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. I had to be here, but on my terms. Later, as I sat on the porch, Evelyn joined me, a glass of iced tea in her hand. "It's been a while since you were last here," she said, her tone almost conversational. "Yeah," I replied, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Life gets busy." She nodded, sipping her drink. "I heard you and Marcus are doing well." "We are," I said, feeling a warmth at the mention of his name. "He's been really supportive." "Good," she said, though there was a hint of something else in her voice, envy, perhaps, or regret. "It's important to have someone reliable." I turned to look at her, searching for any sign of sincerity. "Why did you really call me here, Evelyn?" She hesitated, a rare moment of vulnerability flickering across her face. "Harper, I need you to help manage things. The school board is watching, and with your father's condition." There it was. The truth, or at least part of it. Her need to maintain her image, to keep everything looking perfect from the outside. "I'm here for Dad," I said firmly. "But I won't be part of any charade." She stiffened, her composure slipping for just a second. "This is about family," she insisted. "Family," I repeated, the word heavy with irony. I'm here for Dad, and I'll help where I can. But I won't pretend everything's fine when it's not. Evelyn said nothing, her silence more telling than any argument. As the evening wore on, I felt a shift, a subtle change in our dynamic. I wasn't the compliant daughter anymore, and she knew it. That night, as I lay in my old room, surrounded by remnants of a past life, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Evelyn might want to use Dad's illness as a pawn, but I wouldn't let her. I had my own path to forge, my own story to tell. Before drifting off to sleep, I thought about Marcus, about the life we were building together. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, I felt ready to face them, on my terms, not Evelyn's. And that was a victory in itself. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. I stood by the window, sipping my coffee, trying to brace myself for whatever the day might bring. The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken words and unresolved tensions. I was pulled from my thoughts by a knock on the door. Evelyn entered without waiting for an invitation, her expression a mix of determination and something else, perhaps desperation. "Harper, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight. I turned to face her, setting my coffee down. "About what?" She hesitated, a rare flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "The school board is having a meeting next week. They want to discuss Thomas's condition and how it might affect my position." There it was, the real reason for her urgency. Her image, her status, always at the forefront. "And you need me there because?" "Because it would look better if the family presented a united front," she replied, her words carefully measured. I felt a surge of frustration. "You mean if I play along with your version of reality?" "Harper," she said, her tone softening, "this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. The stability of our family." I shook my head, disbelief mingling with anger. Stability? Or control? Her eyes flashed, but she quickly composed herself. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under." "Maybe not," I conceded, "but I do understand the pressure you've put on me." "On Dad." She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "And what about Logan? Does he know about all this?" Her expression tightened at the mention of my ex-boyfriend. "Logan has nothing to do with this, doesn't he?" I challenged. "He was part of your plans before, wasn't he?" Evelyn's silence was answer enough. I felt a bitter satisfaction at having hit a nerve. But before I could press further, my father's voice called out from down the hall. I excused myself, leaving Evelyn standing there, her composure cracking. In my father's room, I found him sitting up, looking more alert than he had the day before. "Harper," he greeted, his voice warm but weary. "Hey, Dad," I said, sitting beside him. "How are you feeling?" "Better," he replied, though his eyes betrayed his fatigue. "It's good to see you." We sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken words hanging between us. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I'm sorry, Harper. For everything." I looked at him surprised. "Dad, you don't have to." "No," he interrupted gently, "I do. I should have spoken up more. I should have been there for you." His admission was like a balm, soothing some of the old wounds. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. As I sat with him, I noticed a stack of papers on the bedside table. Among them was a letter, the handwriting unmistakably his. Curious, I picked it up, glancing at him for permission. He nodded, a resigned look in his eyes. "I wrote that a while back. Never had the courage to give it to you." I unfolded the letter, my heart pounding as I read his words of regret and love. He acknowledged his silence, his complicity in Evelyn's schemes, and his desire for me to find my own path. It was a revelation, one that deepened my understanding of him and his struggles. "Thank you," I said again, my voice barely a whisper. "This means a lot." He nodded, a small, sad smile on his lips. "I just want you to be happy, Harper. To live your life." As I left the room, the letter clutched tightly in my hand, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My father's words were a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight, that there was more to our family than Evelyn's manipulations. I found Evelyn in the kitchen, her back to me as she prepared breakfast. "I'm going to the board meeting," I announced, my voice steady. She turned, surprise flickering across her face. "You will. But not for the reasons you think," I added. "I'm going to support Dad, to make sure his wishes are heard. Evelyn's expression hardened, but she nodded. As long as we're on the same page. We're not, I replied, meeting her gaze. And we never will be. With that, I left the room, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with my father's support and my own determination to break free from the past. As I stepped outside, the morning air felt crisp and full of promise. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I felt like I was truly on my own path, and that was a victory worth fighting for. Back at the clinic, the familiar sounds of barking dogs and the hum of activity grounded me, offering a brief respite from the chaos at home. But my mind was still tangled in the web of family drama, and I knew I needed to talk to Marcus. After work, I found him in our small garden, tending to the plants with his usual care. The sight of him, so focused and calm, brought a sense of peace. "Hey," I called, walking over to join him. He looked up, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Hey, how was your day?" "Eventful," I replied, leaning against the fence. "I need to talk to you about something." He nodded, setting aside his tools. "What's up?" I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out. "I found a letter from my dad. He wrote it a while ago, apologizing for not standing up to Evelyn. It was a lot to take in." Marcus listened, his expression thoughtful. "How do you feel about it?" "Conflicted," I admitted. It's like, on one hand, I'm grateful he acknowledged it. But on the other, it's hard not to feel angry about all the years he stayed silent. He reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "It sounds like he's trying to make amends in his own way." "Yeah," I said, nodding. "And I want to be there for him. But Evelyn's still trying to control everything." Marcus frowned, a hint of frustration in his eyes. "She's using his illness to keep up appearances, isn't she?" "Exactly," I replied, the words bitter on my tongue. "And now she wants me to help her put on a show for the school board." He sighed, shaking his head. "You're not obligated to play her games, Harper." "I know," I said, feeling a surge of determination. "But I can't just walk away. I need to stand up for Dad and for myself." Marcus nodded, his support unwavering. "Whatever you decide, I'm here." His reassurance was a balm, giving me the strength I needed. But as I sat there, a new thought struck me, a possibility I hadn't considered. "Marcus," I said slowly, "what if we start looking into adoption?" His eyes widened slightly, surprise mingling with curiosity. "Are you sure?" "I've been thinking about it," I admitted. "I want a family, but I want it to be on our terms, not dictated by my parents' expectations." He smiled, a warmth spreading across his face. "I'm all in, if that's what you want." His response filled me with hope, a vision of a future free from the shadows of the past. But before I could bask in that feeling, my phone buzzed, pulling me back to reality. It was a message from an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. The words were like a punch to the gut. "Meet me. We need to talk. It's about Evelyn." I showed the message to Marcus, my mind racing. "Who do you think it is?" he asked, a hint of concern in his voice. "I have no idea," I replied, my heart pounding. "But I need to find out." The next day, I arrived at the designated meeting spot, a quiet cafe on the edge of town. My mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, none of them comforting. As I scanned the room, I spotted a familiar face, Logan. He waved me over, a look of urgency in his eyes. "Harper," he said as I approached, "thanks for coming." I sat down wary. "What's this about, Logan?" He leaned in, his expression serious. "It's about Evelyn. She's planning something, and I thought you should know." I frowned, skepticism creeping in. "Why tell me now?" "Because," he said, his voice low, "she's using me to keep tabs on you. She's worried you'll disrupt her plans." His admission was like a cold bucket of water, shocking and unwelcome. "And you're just going along with it?" I was, he admitted, guilt flashing across his face. "But I realized it's not right. You deserve to know." I studied him, searching for any hint of deception. "Why should I trust you?" "Because," he said, meeting my gaze, "I owe you that much." His words hung in the air, a fragile bridge between past betrayals and possible redemption. I didn't know if I could trust him, but his warning couldn't be ignored. As I left the cafe, my mind was a storm of emotions. Logan's revelation had shifted the ground beneath me, forcing me to reevaluate my next steps. I knew one thing for certain. The stakes were higher than ever, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The sun was setting as I returned home, the weight of Logan's warning still heavy on my mind. I found Marcus in the living room, his laptop open as he worked on a design. He looked up, concern etched on his face. "How did it go?" I dropped my bag on the floor, running a hand through my hair. "Logan told me Evelyn's been using him to keep tabs on me. She's planning something, but he didn't know what." Marcus frowned, closing his laptop. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" "I don't know," I admitted, pacing the room. "But I can't ignore it. If Evelyn's up to something, I need to be ready." He stood, crossing the room to pull me into a hug. "We'll figure it out, Harper. You're not alone in this." His words were reassuring, but they didn't ease the knot of anxiety in my chest. As much as I wanted to believe Logan, his past betrayals made it hard to trust his motives. Yet the urgency in his voice had been genuine, and that was enough to keep me on edge. The next day, I decided to confront Evelyn. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait for the other shoe to drop. When I arrived at my parents' house, I found her in the garden, pruning the roses with precise, deliberate movements. "Evelyn," I called, my voice cutting through the quiet afternoon. She glanced up, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "Harper, I wasn't expecting you." "I need to talk to you," I said, stepping closer. "About Logan." Her expression barely flickered. "What about him?" "He told me you've been using him to keep tabs on me," I said, watching her closely. "Is it true?" She set down the shears, her gaze steady. "Logan is not a reliable source, Harper. You know that." "Maybe," I replied, crossing my arms. "But I also know you'll do whatever it takes to maintain control." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't deny it. "I'm doing what's necessary for our family." "For your image, you mean?" I countered, frustration simmering beneath my words. "What are you planning, Evelyn?" She sighed, a calculated move. "The board meeting is coming up, and I need to ensure everything goes smoothly. That's all." I shook my head, disbelief mingling with anger. "You're using Dad's illness as leverage, aren't you?" Her silence was answer enough. I felt a surge of determination, a resolve to protect my father from becoming a pawn in her games. "I won't let you manipulate him or me." "Harper," she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone, "I just want what's best for all of us." "Then stop trying to control everything," I shot back. "Let us make our own choices." She opened her mouth to respond, but I turned and walked away, my heart pounding. I needed to get out of there before I said something I'd regret. Back at home, I found Marcus waiting for me, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "How did it go?" I sank onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. She didn't deny it. "She's using Dad's illness to keep up appearances." He sat beside me, taking my hand. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted, frustration lacing my voice. "I feel like I'm caught in a web, and every move I make just tightens it." He squeezed my hand, his presence a steady anchor. "We'll find a way through this, Harper. Together." His words were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. But as the evening wore on, a new thought crept into my mind, a possibility I hadn't dared to consider. "What if we go public?" I asked, the idea forming as I spoke. "Expose Evelyn's manipulation to the board, to the community?" Marcus looked thoughtful, weighing the implications. "It's a big risk, but it could force her hand." "I know," I said, the prospect both terrifying and exhilarating. "But it might be the only way to stop her." He nodded, his expression resolute. "If that's what you want to do, I'm with you." His support was a balm, giving me the courage to consider the unthinkable. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and the fallout could be severe, but it was time to take a stand. As I lay in bed that night, the weight of the decision settled over me. I was on the brink of a major crisis, one that could redefine everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and justice. But for the first time, I felt ready to face it head-on, determined to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. The community event was in full swing when Marcus and I arrived, the air buzzing with chatter and laughter. It was the kind of gathering Evelyn thrived in, where appearances mattered more than reality. As we entered, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach, knowing what lay ahead. Evelyn spotted us almost immediately, her smile as polished as ever. "Harper, Marcus," she greeted, her voice smooth. "I'm glad you could make it." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, though the words felt hollow. As the evening wore on, I watched Evelyn work the room, her charm on full display. But beneath the surface, I could sense the tension, the pressure she was under to maintain her facade. It was only a matter of time before the cracks began to show. The opportunity came when Evelyn, in her role as the evening's host, took the stage to make a speech. As she spoke about family values and community, I felt a surge of anger at the hypocrisy of it all. My hands clenched into fists as I listened, the urge to expose the truth almost overwhelming. But it wasn't until she turned her attention to me that the real confrontation began. "And let's not forget the importance of legacy," she said, her gaze landing on me. "Harper, dear, when will we be hearing the pitter-patter of little feet?" The question hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in a seemingly innocent inquiry. I felt Marcus tense beside me, his support a steady presence. But this was a battle I had to fight on my own. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, the room falling silent as all eyes turned to me. "Actually, Evelyn," I said, my voice clear and steady, "there's something I've been meaning to share." The tension was palpable, a collective breath held in anticipation. Evelyn's smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "I can't have children," I said, the words ringing out like a bell. "And it's because years ago, you coerced me into an abortion." The silence that followed was deafening, the shock rippling through the crowd like a wave. Evelyn's composure shattered, her expression a mix of disbelief and anger. "Harper," she began, her voice shaking, "this is not the place." "Why not?" I interrupted, my resolve unyielding. "You wanted to make this about family, about legacy. Well, this is part of that story." The room was a sea of stunned faces, whispers breaking out like wildfire. I could see the carefully constructed image Evelyn had crafted beginning to crumble, the truth laying bare the manipulation and control. As the weight of my revelation settled over the room, I felt a strange sense of liberation. But it was short-lived, as the enormity of what I'd done began to sink in. The fallout would be severe, and I had no idea how it would affect my father or even Marcus. Evelyn's eyes were blazing, her voice low and dangerous. "You've gone too far, Harper." "Maybe," I conceded, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "But at least I'm not hiding anymore." The rest of the evening passed in a blur, the atmosphere tense and uncomfortable. Marcus stayed by my side, his presence a comforting anchor as we navigated the aftermath. But as we left the event, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me like a shadow. Back home, I collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. Marcus sat beside me, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "You did it," he said softly. "Yeah," I replied, my voice hollow. "But at what cost?" He took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You stood up for yourself, Harper. That's worth something." I nodded, though the uncertainty lingered. I had exposed the truth, but the consequences were still unknown, and the path ahead felt more daunting than ever. As I lay in bed that night, sleep eluded me, my mind a whirlwind of doubts and fears. I had reached a breaking point, the weight of my choices pressing down on me like a heavy shroud. But despite the darkness, a flicker of hope remained, a belief that, somehow, I would find a way through the storm. The morning after the community event felt like the calm before a storm. I woke up with a sense of dread, knowing that the fallout from my revelation was far from over. The house was quiet, Marcus already at work, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the decision I knew I had to make. I needed to see my father. I needed to know if he was okay after everything that had happened. The drive to my parents' house felt interminable, each mile filled with anticipation and fear. When I arrived, the house was eerily still, as if holding its breath. I found my father in his study, a place that had always been his sanctuary. He looked up as I entered, a mix of surprise and relief on his face. "Harper," he greeted, his voice warm despite the tension in the air. "Dad," I said, crossing the room to sit beside him. "I'm sorry about last night. I didn't mean to cause so much trouble." He shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "You spoke your truth, Harper. I'm proud of you for that." His words were a balm, soothing the guilt that had been gnawing at me. But before I could respond, Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Harper," she said, her voice clipped. "We need to talk." I nodded, feeling the weight of the confrontation looming. We moved to the living room, the air thick with unspoken words. Evelyn stood by the window, her posture rigid, as if bracing herself for what was to come. "You've made quite a mess," she began, her tone sharp but controlled. "I told the truth," I replied, meeting her gaze. "Something you've been avoiding for years." She turned to face me, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and something else, fear, perhaps. "You've jeopardized everything I've worked for. Your image." I challenged, my voice steady. "Your perfect facade?" Evelyn's composure slipped, her hands clenching into fists. "This isn't just about me, Harper. It's about our family." "Our family," I echoed, the words heavy with irony. "The one you've controlled and manipulated for years?" She flinched, the truth cutting deeper than any accusation. "I did what I thought was best. For you," I said, my voice rising. "Not for Dad, not for me." The room was charged with tension, the air crackling with the weight of our confrontation. But before I could continue, my father entered, his presence a calming force. "Evelyn," he said quietly, his voice firm. "It's time to stop." She turned to him, surprise flickering across her face. "Thomas, you don't understand." "No," he interrupted, his gaze steady. "I do. And I should have said something a long time ago." The silence that followed was profound, a moment of reckoning that had been years in the making. Evelyn's eyes widened, her control slipping as the reality of the situation sank in. "You're taking her side?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I'm taking our side," he replied, his words gentle but resolute. "This isn't about sides, Evelyn. It's about facing the truth." The room was still, the weight of his words settling over us like a heavy blanket. I watched as Evelyn's facade crumbled, the vulnerability beneath her polished exterior laid bare. For a moment, I saw her as she truly was, afraid, insecure, desperate to hold on to the image she'd created. And in that moment, I realized that revenge wasn't what I wanted. Justice wasn't about tearing her down. It was about breaking free from the chains of the past. "Evelyn," I said softly, my voice carrying the weight of years of conflict and pain, "I'm not here to destroy you. I just want to live my life on my terms." She said nothing, her silence a testament to the battle raging within her. But as I turned to leave, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a certainty that I was finally on the path to healing. Outside, the sun was shining, the world bright and full of promise. As I walked away from the house, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, I felt free, free to define my own life, free to embrace the future with open arms. And that, I realized, was the true victory. The adoption process had been a whirlwind, each step bringing Marcus and me closer to the family we had longed for. The day we brought our daughter home was filled with a quiet joy that settled into every corner of our lives, a testament to the journey we had traveled to get here. As I sat in the nursery, watching her sleep, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was the life I had fought for, a life defined by love, not appearances. The shadows of the past seemed to fade, replaced by the promise of a future filled with hope and possibility. Marcus appeared in the doorway, a soft smile on his face. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" he said, joining me by the crib. "She is," I replied, my heart swelling with gratitude. "I can't believe she's finally here." He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, his presence a comforting anchor. "We did it, Harper. We made it." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle over me. We had faced the storm and come out stronger on the other side. But as much as I wanted to leave the past behind, there was still one piece of unfinished business that lingered in my mind. A few days later, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unmistakably Evelyn's, the envelope sealed with a formality that belied the emotions within. I hesitated, the weight of our history pressing down on me as I opened it. The letter was brief, but the words carried a depth of emotion I hadn't expected. Evelyn expressed a desire to reconcile, acknowledging her past mistakes and expressing a hope for healing. It was an olive branch, tentative and fragile, but genuine. I showed the letter to Marcus, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. "What do you think?" I asked, needing his perspective. He took a moment to read it, his expression thoughtful. "It sounds like she's trying in her own way." "Yeah," I said, feeling a mix of hope and skepticism. "But can I trust her?" He shrugged, his gaze steady. "That's up to you, Harper. But maybe it's worth considering." His words echoed in my mind as I pondered my next move. Forgiveness was a complex thing, tangled up in years of hurt and betrayal. But as I looked at our daughter, I realized that I wanted to create a world for her that was free from the shadows of the past. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and dialed Evelyn's number. The line rang, each tone a reminder of the distance that had grown between us. When she answered, her voice was hesitant, unsure. "Harper," she said, a note of surprise in her tone. "Evelyn," I replied, my voice steady. "I got your letter." There was a pause, the silence filled with unspoken words. "I meant what I wrote," she said finally, her voice soft. "I'd like to try and make things right." I considered her words, the sincerity behind them. "I'd like that too," I admitted, feeling the tension begin to ease. "But it's going to take time." "I understand," she replied, a hint of relief in her voice. "Thank you, Harper." As we ended the call, I felt a sense of closure, a resolution that had been a long time coming. It wasn't perfect, and there was still much to be mended. But it was a start. In the days that followed, I focused on the life Marcus and I were building, the family we were creating. It wasn't always easy, but it was ours, and that was enough. One evening, as I watched the sunset from our porch, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The struggles, the triumphs, the lessons learned along the way. I realized that the themes of revenge and justice had transformed into something deeper, a quest for truth, for authenticity, for love. As the sky turned to twilight, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of promise. And whatever came next, I knew I was ready to face it, surrounded by the love of the family I had chosen and the life I had fought to create.